This video is a brief introduction to the life and politics of John Locke, the first key thinker for liberalism, paper 3, political ideas. We're going to talk very briefly about the world that he lived in and how that shaped how he viewed the world, and then we'll look at his perception of human nature, the state, society and the economy. What's important to note is that John Locke, born in the 1630s into a tumultuous time in English history, he lives through the Civil War, the abolition of the monarchy in the House of Lords, the restoration of the monarchy, the rise of James II, and then the invitation of a foreign monarch, William of Orange, to come and take the throne from the rightful heir James II. So the 1630s is a time of personal rule where Charles I, James II's father, is on the throne, and for many Protestants, he is looking and behaving too much like they would expect a Catholic monarch to do. Not only is his wife a French Catholic, but he is very much in favour of some of the old traditions of the English Church and believes in the divine right of kings, and from 1629 until 1640 embarks upon personal rule where he rules without parliament altogether. And to many Protestants this was the sign of absolutism. And what's important here, and the reason why I mention it, is for Protestants in England at this time to be an absolutist, to be a ruler that took complete control over all aspects of the state. For Protestants, to be that was also to be a Catholic ruler. And the two came hand in hand. Catholicism and absolute rule came hand in hand. So although Charles I was a Protestant, his wife was a Catholic, his preferred Protestant church looked a little bit too much like the Catholic faith for some Protestants, and he was willing to rule without parliament like he did with personal rule. And so there was very much a great fear amongst Protestants in England that Catholicism was going to be introduced by this king. So Locke lives through the Civil War and supports the parliamentarian cause. He actually has to move away into exile during the reign of James II because he has come out and spoken so boldly against Catholic rule and absolutist rule, because it in his mind abuses the rights of the citizen. Because of his views, he has to go and live in exile in the Netherlands, which is the country where William of Orange will be invited by British or English nobles, I should say, to come and take the throne. The two treaties of government was initially published anonymously in 1690, and that's because it was a very dangerous document, and we'll come on to why it was a dangerous document in just a moment. But later, in certainly in his will, it becomes clear that John Locke is the author of the two treatises of government. And this is the document that sort of cements John Locke's place as the father of liberal thought. So what does it mean to be a liberal? Well, the first treatise of government is basically an attack on the divine right of kings. There was a document, Patriarcha, which was produced in 1680, and the first treatise of government was basically an attack on that document to say why those ideas are not applicable to 17th century society. But it's the second treatise that we're really concerned with, because that is where Locke sets out his vision for what a liberal world looks like. And liberalism is, in essence, the idea that individuals are, to varying extents, born with the natural ability of rational thinking. And if, according to Locke, we have that ability to make decisions for our own benefit, then that could be applied to the state, to the government, to society. Now, that doesn't mean that Locke is advocating for democracy. He's not. But what he is advocating for is the rights of the individual. That individual behaviour should not be limited by the state. And you can see straight away, if you've already looked at Thomas Hobbes, your first conservative key thinker, how they view the state very differently. So Locke views human beings in a much more positive way than Hobbes does, and is far more suspicious of what the powers of the government can do. So to be a liberal is to fully buy into the rights of the individual. The idea that people, human beings, can make a better world for themselves. And that actually, and we'll come to it when we look at the state of nature on the next slide, that actually human beings in their natural state are far more cooperative but also selfish than Thomas Hobbes would have outlined when he wrote Leviathan. So what you need to know about John Locke: writing in the 17th century in England, supportive of this Protestant opposition to absolutist rule as had been seen in France. So for Locke, he had supported the parliamentarian cause in the Civil War and believed that absolutist rule and Catholic rule, as seen in France, were two of the same thing. So even though he advocates in the two treatises of government tolerance to an extent, he's deeply suspicious of the absolutism that seems to be related to Catholic rulers, certainly Catholic kings, in this time period. So first of all, let's look at Locke's views on human nature. Locke imagines a state of nature in very much the same way that Thomas Hobbes does, but he comes to a very different conclusion. Locke sees human beings as egotistical, in that we care about our own lives and we want what's best for us. We are naturally quite selfish. However, Locke views that in a far more optimistic and positive way than Thomas Hobbes did. Remember that for Hobbes, that selfish, competitive nature of human beings would lead to chaos and the breakdown of law and order. Whereas for Locke, because all human beings are born with this quality of rational thought, we can make good decisions for the benefit of ourselves. That is not to say that the state of nature is perfect harmony, because if the state of nature was perfect, there'd be no need for a state of law, as Locke puts it. So Locke does identify that there are moments where there will be concerns between two competing individuals. It won't always be harmonious, but Locke has a far more positive outlook of what human beings are like in their natural state compared to Hobbes and those early conservative thinkers that will follow. Another key aspect for Locke is natural laws and natural rights. So for Locke, there are laws that exist in nature. You do not need a state to tell you what the laws of nature are. And for Locke, this boils down to three things: life, liberty, and property. Now for Locke, we don't need a state to tell us that individuals should enjoy life, liberty, and property. What's ironic here is that Locke had written other documents defending the institution of slavery, and he had economic interests in slavery over in the 13 colonies, as it was. However, for Locke, he is talking about men being created equal: life, liberty, and property. But when Locke talks about men, he isn't using that as a euphemism for mankind. He means men who own property. He certainly is not referring to women. He believes that women are naturally submissive to men. He believes that men are naturally superior to women, reflecting the normal sexism of the time. But he also believes that men who don't own property are not born equal. He doesn't believe that every human being starts from an equal standpoint. But what's important is this belief in property, and that will come to how it shapes Locke's views of the economy later on. But for Locke, particularly with human nature, you need to know that we are egotistical, we are self-interested, but that does not necessarily mean that that is a bad thing, because we are also rational. So next up, we're going to talk about the state. Now, the state in early conservatism is necessary to maintain law and order, because the state of nature is chaos. But for Locke, it is not. The state of nature is not the negative that conservatives certainly like Hobbes had outlined. However, Locke identifies that the state of law is a better place to be as long as it protects those natural laws and those natural rights, life, liberty and property. Locke believes in negative liberty. Essentially what that means is that individuals are most free when they are not restrained, when there is no authority to tell them what they can and cannot do. And so for Locke, he believes in a minimal state. The state should do as little as possible. The state should be involved in an individual's life only when necessary. And for Locke, the only time the state should infringe upon an individual's life is to protect those rights, life, liberty, and property. So he believes in that foundational equality, and he believes that that should be at the heart of everything that government does. But he also believes in a social contract. He believes that individuals who give their tacit consent to live in a state do so with the understanding that they will follow the laws of the state, they will submit to the state as long as it protects those natural laws. When the state does not respect those natural laws, people can contract out of the state. So if individuals do not find themselves that they do not live in a liberal state, they can contract out. And essentially what Locke was doing here is he was basically pointing out why the people of England were right to essentially dethrone James II. Because in Locke's opinion, James II was an absolutist monarch. He was going to enforce Catholicism, remove any attempt at religious toleration for Protestants, and rule with an iron fist, and not respect those natural laws. And what he was doing is he was advocating, he was defending why it was right for the so-called Immortal Seven, those British politicians who sent a letter to William of Orange, essentially requesting that their country be invaded in the name of freedom and the Protestant faith. So if the social contract is broken by the state and the state does not protect natural laws and natural rights, citizens can contract out. Okay, next up, we're going to look at early liberalism and John Locke on society. Now, for Locke and early liberals, or classical liberals as we call them, society is essentially a collection of individuals. And people sort of behave and reciprocate good behaviour within a society because it's within their best individual interest to do so. So we're still egotistical. We still care about ourselves and our own lives and our own progress over everything else. However, we do so because as rational individuals, we see that to live in a harmonious society alongside others is the best thing for us, because it will provide that peace and that stability that allows individualism to flourish. But he is very much concerned with the rights of the individual. And one thing that Locke advocated for was tolerance. And there's a slight irony to that because of his fear of a Catholic-dominated England. But what essentially Locke was advocating for was limited religious tolerance, essentially for different forms of Protestantism. And that was central to his idea when it comes to individualism and the lack of involvement that the state should have. But essentially what you need to know when it comes to society for classical liberals is that it is a collection of rational individuals. That is what society is. Later liberal thinkers will go on to challenge that and say that we have other natural qualities that changes and updates the liberal view of society. And finally, Locke on the economy. I've said a few times that Locke considered property to be a natural right, and so Locke considered it to be an infringement of natural rights if the state involved itself in the economy at all. And so Locke was and early liberals are key proponents of laissez-faire capitalism, of a free market, of no government interference. Locke refers to property as that with which man hath mixed his labour. And so For Locke, if the state was to intervene, then it would be an infringement of those natural rights. And so private property in particular, was something that Locke was very keen to protect. Now, what you will find is that later liberals will begin to challenge that free market economic view, because they see inequalities. Now, for Locke, foundational equality is enough, and individuals will have different potentials. Some people will reach their potential, others will not, but it is not the role of the state to involve itself in economic matters. That is primarily the role of the individual. And that links to this idea of the state as a night watchman. In cricket terms, the night watchman comes in towards the end of a day's play with the sole task of not losing your wicket. That is the job of a night watchman, not to do anything actively, not to put runs on the board, just don't lose your wicket. And for early liberals, classical liberals like Locke, the state should be a night watchman. And what that means is that the state should only intervene to protect those natural rights. And for Locke, property is one of those. So state intervention in the economy would infringe upon an individual's right to property and would not be the action of a liberal government, of a liberal state. And so no state involvement in the economy whatsoever from Locke's perspective. And if you wanted to know more about that, Locke was quite close with Adam Smith, and Adam Smith is seen as the father of liberal economics. You may come across Adam Smith in your paper 3 reading. You might also come across the Adam Smith Institute in paper 1 when you're looking at think tanks. But essentially Adam Smith is very much in line with Locke about protecting a free market and the right to property.